Hi everyone, I'm Krishna and I'm a programming manager at the MAP Academy, and I'm so happy to welcome you all here on a Thursday evening. Just to let you know in advance, we are recording this video, this session. For those of you who are new here, the MAP Academy is an open access digital resource with a focus on art and cultural histories of South Asia. Our offerings include an extensive encyclopedia of art. We have online courses, image-led essays and stories, grants, and a few other special projects, including curatorial works. Now, through these, we sort of encourage knowledge building and engagement with the visual arts in the region. You can follow us on Instagram and sign up for the newsletters. It's all on the website, and we are putting the links down here on the chat. Today's event is part of our MAP Academy live series. It's a monthly series where we host expert-led sessions at the intersection of research and practice. Today, we have with us an incredible author and illustrator, Parismita Singh. Based in Assam, Parismita Singh is the author of Peace Has Come, a collection of short stories, and the graphic novel Hotel at the End of the World. Her children's book include the graphic novel Mara and the Clay Cows, Fat King, Thin Dog. She's edited the anthology Centerpiece, New Writing and Art from Northeast India with Zuban, and co-conceptualized the POW, the anthology of comics. She has published in the Huffington Post, the NRC Sketchbook, The Voice of Fashion, and also heads a creative multilingual education project in Assam with the NGO Pratham Education Foundation. Parismita Singh's stories, as some of you might know, they deal with socio-political issues and conflicts, particularly in Northeast India. It deals with ordinary lives sandwiched by larger political events and power struggles, very pressing themes of much immediate relevance. She also works with themes of history, sustainability, indigenous knowledge, textile and craft cultures to promote diverse and inclusive forms of storytelling. So today's session, Crisis Comics, Making Art in Troubled Times, will look at how writing, creating art and stories become acts of hope and open up new possibilities and ways of thinking for us. Before I hand this over to Parismita, I'd quickly like to inform you that towards the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A, and you can drop in all your questions on the chat, and we'll open up the session for discussion towards the end. Thank you so much. And one small housekeeping note, please ensure that your mics are on mute and the videos are off so that we have a smooth session. Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks again for joining us. Over to you, Parismita.
Right. Yes, it's an absolute honor to be here with the Math Academy. I greatly admire their work. They've got the stellar online presence, and they do all these really neat courses, and it's really interesting work. So I'm very privileged to be here to speak about comics at their invitation, and thank you to everyone who's registered and showed up here for the talk. And so we'll get started on Crisis Comics, how to make art in troubled times. Yes, so this talk has arrived at a really opportune moment for me for two reasons. One is that I've been thinking about this idea of the crisis for a while now, at least for the last decade or two, with so much going on, in the world around us. And two, I'm also happy to be talking about comics because after a bit of a hiatus, I've gone back to working on a long form comic again. And this is a very good opportunity for me to look back at my own process, my own engagements, and begin a conversation about the possibilities of what the comic or the graphic novel can do in today's world. And for the purists, I just want to mention that I'm going to be using the terms comics and graphic novels and art almost interchangeably. And that is a deliberate choice because I'm really hoping to be able to open up comics as a medium and see it in a more expansive form so that comics here encompass the arts of drawing, prose, lettering, installation, journalism, and journaling, textile, collage, a host of elements. So, and I think, because I work across mediums, as you'd see in my introduction, I work with prose as well as with the graphic forms, as well as art and writing and other things. And I'm sort of really looking to comics as a possibility of all the things you can do with text and image at the level of form as well as content. So as an introduction, I'm just going to put on a few of my publications here. um, so Hotel at the End of the World is my graphic novel. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's an old book. I think it came out in 2009. Then I have Miranda Clay Cows, which is another graphic novel for children, and a book of prose called, which a book of short stories called Pieces Come. This has been my latest book form, book length publication. And also edited book called Centerpiece. And edited books are always very special because they give you that's an opportunity to work at the collective level. So this is just, I just wanted to put in as these books out here for you as a form of introduction of the kind of work I do. And these and of course the Power Anthology of Comics as well, where I was a part of collective that edited this book, and Centerpiece. Both I think are very I think important for the times we are in, as well as the idea of how to make art in troubled times, how to make art in difficult times, whether it's a personal or a political situation. And I think the collective is such a good and positive, I mean, is such a inspiring and positive way to go forward. So just putting out the two anthology edited volumes out here too. And yes, and moving from there, I think the idea of the crisis, it's something I've been thinking about, as I mentioned, and I think it's a very interesting point of departure to talk about thinking and making and consuming art, right? And because again, when we talk about a crisis can come in so many shapes and sizes, as we all know. And I'm really looking at a crisis as a short period, a relatively short period, a state of flux, a state of great intensity, when you're forced into a situation where you have to question what you believed in, what you feel, the direction of your life, your work. It is a period of great intensity, after which you are in some sense a changed person, right? And yes, so when I speak about a crisis, yes, there is there are the political situation that is often outside the control. But also when you actually, as you get older and you go through life, you actually begin to feel like there are so many things that are not in your control. And this question of a crisis is, I think, and it's also something I think that is being experienced by younger and younger people, and now, especially with the kind of ecological crisis we are heading to, right? So there is the ecological, the kind of ecological crisis we have, the loss of environment. There is your personal crisis, sickness, death. There is losing a job, or a political crisis, or a pandemic. There is just violence. Or political or a situation where you begin to feel that where you don't feel very secure. And so I think the idea of a crisis is something that happens to all of us. And so the question here really is that what is the role of art, and is it even possible to create in times of crisis? And I think this is particularly, I don't know if this is a question that those of you who are practitioners, who do make comics, whether you're making it at the level of when you're publishing, or you're just making comics or zines, or all kinds of text and a text and image for medium. For those of you who are practitioners, you know that comics is a lot of hard work. You know, earlier I would say that comics is a young person's it's a young person's work. It's a young person's medium, because whether you work digitally or you're working with a good old fashioned pen and ink, I think, unless, of course, and I'm not talking here about the comics that comes out of the big studios or the big companies. No, but if you're working on comics, or you're working on imaging, text in as the writer author partnership, or just as someone who's doing both of it is a lot of work. It's a lot of work. You have the writing, you have the conceptualizing, you have the research, and then you have the drawing, and then you have to put it all together, the storyboarding. And once you put it all together, the job is still not done, because you have to ink and color and digitally have it put together, and then you have to put in the text. So it is a lot of work. So then, and here is so there's also the practical question, in the midst of a crisis, how do you, like, if the world around you is falling apart, how do you take out those 8 hours, 10 hours to sit behind a desk and draw, or uh, uh, create a work? And so this is really the I think this is one of the questions that comes into the idea of, how do you draw in, how do you create, how do you draw, how do you make comics in troubled times? And here, I think what I find interesting is that this is also the contradiction and magic of art, as well as comics, right? And I feel like that you know, there is this whole idea of, I mean, there's this a phrase, there's the saying, which goes like, "May you live in interesting times." And it's a cast message, because interesting times are difficult times. So how do you make, I mean, how do you find the space? How do you inspire yourself? How do you find the resources to be able to create in difficult times? And this is where I feel that uh, for some reason, this whole thing of comics, this text and image medium, seems to be particularly well suited in its modern version. The kind of work that's been coming out globally in the last couple of decades, comics seem to be particularly suited to comment and speak and tell stories about the crisis. And so I'm going to quickly, yes. So I'm just a brief glance at, like, some of the titles of books that have done really well, that are very popular in the last couple of decades, and which I terming comics and graphic novels, and but that comes out of this medium. And so many of these books, so many of the books that are so fundamental to how we see comics today, um, are about are about crisis, ecological crisis, military crisis, occupations, revolutions, women's rights, and whole, I mean, and so I feel very much like, yes, comics need a lot of work, they need resources, but there is something that is hardwired in the way it works, that I think we have a lot of works to look at for inspiration on how to write about the crisis. Yes. And so I'm just going to take a brief detour, right? So we have all these comics in India as well, globally renowned comics. But at the same time, I also want to mention here that I don't always look to comics for my inspiration, right? I also look at all the allied arts. I also look at a lot of the other arts that are in my immediate surroundings. And one of the forms that I have tried to study, and that I've spent time looking at, and trying to understand, and sort of just getting a sense of its history and how it works, is hand weaving, right? And I've just been stunned by the fact that, hand weaving is something people have been doing for millennia, right? Like, for a really, really long time. So all this industrialization, and fast fashion, yes, all of it is here. It's here to stay. It's a big part of it. But at the same time, there are these arts and crafts that seem so essential to us as humans, and that have somehow, and each and for them, and for these arts, if you closely look closely at, it doesn't just have to be comics. Any arts, any crafts in your environment, in your culture, what you see is that the idea of the crisis is very much a part of the history of these crafts and arts, right? In fact, it is the crisis that brings about all the changes, the developments, right? In fact, there is even an expression which I find very, very precious in the Kocharama community, where they have a word for when a thread breaks when you're weaving. Because when a thread breaks and you're weaving, there's nothing you can do about it. You have to just keep. You cannot, you cannot put, you can't Photoshop it, right? And then and it's called the walk of a jungle leech, right? When that happens. And so what happens is, but when that happens, there is a term for it. So it happens. But when that happens, it becomes, you have to find, as a weaver, you have to find a way to go ahead with it. You have to find a way to continue weaving, to complete your cloth. And I feel like, and I think that is such a good metaphor for our day-to-day engagement with the arts and the crafts and comics, that we have these crises within the medium in our immediate lives, but how is it, I mean, how we find a way to integrate it into our work, right? Yes. So now I feel that, since we are really since we are talking about, and Krishna so generously has she's spoken about how, through our engagement with comics, through my work, the hope is that we arrive at a situation that we arrive at the hope is that we arrive at some strategy, some way to think and plan on how to and strategize, to think and strategize on how to work, how to hope through art, through comics. And so I thought, for this, I should have something practical to offer people who are listening. And so I came up with this, with the idea of the tea kettle, or the cup of tea, and the crisis bag. So I feel a little bit like, this curse of may you live in interesting times, and the crisis that seems to seems to always be around us and make our lives so difficult. What are the different ways we deal with it? One is the crisis bag, right? So what I mean by the crisis bag is, it's an idea that I have borrowed from the Bangladeshi photographer, Shahidul Alam, and he had this, and so he was talking that, as a photographer, he has a little bag, like a pouch, which has all the emergency equipment, the tools that he needs in order to be able to immediately do photography work in all kinds of situations. It can be a protest, it may be traveling, or in a very intense situation, to be able to do that documentation, to be able to do that immediate documentation as a part of his practice. So I think, I see that as a comic book artist, as someone who's worked for a while, I feel like I have this crisis. I have like a crisis pack, the idea of the crisis pack. Then I have the idea of the tea kettle, or the cup of tea, which is when, once the immediate crisis has passed, and we have the space, and we have a little bit of respite, a little bit of time to think back on what has been, and then we're able to reflect and work in terms of, and that could come through in terms of fiction, that could come through in terms of memoir, that could come through in terms of works of art, where we've had the time to be able to absorb and reflect on the crisis that has passed. While with the crisis back, I'm thinking mostly nonfiction, maybe graphic reportage, maybe, where you're really doing an immediate, where sort of where you're commenting very directly on things that are happening and taking place around you in that moment of crisis, right? And so I've tried to map out my work a little bit around that. So just to structure to structure my talk around that. Yeah. So yes. So yes. So what can we do with graphic novels? What can we do with the graphic narrative? So when I talk about writing through a crisis, doing graphic news, so one of the things that I discovered as was that I had never really had a chance to do nonfiction till fairly late in my career. And then I had this commission by this, there was an editor who commissioned me for about almost a year long graphic reportage project uh, on the political situation in Assam. So for about 2 years, I did a series of graphic reportage for that website and for the news website, Huffington Post India. And it was such an incredible experience because I mean, I'd always known about the potential. I'd always felt that there was great potential to the graphic narrative mode, to the graphic novel mode, in terms of commentary, in terms of news reportage. But actually doing it, being in the ground and doing this, I really got a sense that there is so much one can convey through the graphic narrative of news events, right? Of things that are taking place. And so some of it is, I just put down some of it in the here that you can. It's in fact it's you have visuals are great to be able to put in data to give a human, and then you can have a story. You're able to give a human face to a crisis. And most importantly, when there is such a glut of news, when something's topical and it's breaking, everyone is writing. And then but what the graphic narrative, the slow journalism, what it does, it really has a capacity to be able to cut through that this glut of news. It's able to cut through. And there is so and I really found that I was able to convey a sense of urgency, able to include stories and data and debates, perspective, all of that in some sense into my graphic reportage, right? And so just to go back, like a sense of place. So one of the challenges that I had working on this graphic reportage series was that I was reporting from Assam, and I was reporting on issues that did not that a lot of people did not have a lot of information about, right? So it was and so the so the challenge was really to be able to, one, to get people interested enough to click and to want to read about this place and these situations that may not be of immediate urgent interest to them. So, and also, and also to give people a sense of where it is happening, right? And so I really feel that the visual element, and this is so traditional, in that sense. Of course, you can do a lot of apps, you can have a whole lot of comics working in very different ways, but really, I use this very traditional comics method of just being able to of being able to denote place through a couple of just visual cues here and there that give people a sense of place, that give, and with that sense of place, a sense of perhaps, an engagement with that piece of news, that they feel like, they feel that, they a better sense of connection with the piece, with these visual markers, right? So this was one thing that I felt was that the graphic narrative really worked for me in that sense. And then to go back to the crisis package. So for a sense of place, um, uh, a phone camera, a very basic phone camera, if you have the resources, if you have if the situation allows, a sketchbook and a pen, right? So I personally found that in many very fraught situations or very tense situations where people would may not have been very comfortable answering questions or engaging or at particular political points of tension, when there's been violence or there's a very fraught situation, then I often found that, just being this person with a pen and a notebook and doing little sketches or engaging with people in that sense, I felt that, it was another way of engaging with people on the ground, with the people you want to interview or engage with, right? So yes, so location, these visual cues, being able to walk on that, I found the graphic narrative very useful for that. Yeah, and the other point that I found interesting in my engagement with the graphic narrative, with the graphic reportage was, often when it comes to visual stories, when it comes to comics, and this is a prejudice that really goes back to the way comics were treated, perhaps when we were younger, is that there is a sense that somehow it is makes things simpler, right? As if to put it in visual form, it somehow makes things more accessible. So that is something that we can speak about in the question answer series too. That do graphic narratives, do graphic reportage make news more accessible? And so that's a question I'd like to put out there. But the point I'm making here is that I also felt that along with this ease, or this it also allowed me, the graphic narrative also allowed me to express complexity. So it's not simply about making things simple. I also found that this was a narrative that really allowed me to um, put forward very complex situations and to be able to treat a topic or a theme with the degree of complexity that it required, right? So it's both. And I think that's what also makes this genre, this medium so special. The fact that you can make it, it makes it accessible, and it also gives you space to be able to capture the complexity of a situation. Yeah. Yes. And of course, another really important point is the question of ethics, right? And so I think along, when we keep talking about the metaphor of the crisis pack, that little package where you're going to have the mobile phone and, the sketchbook and all of that to be able to, when you're sort of engaging with a crisis and trying to um, work on a graphic reportage for it. I think I would also add that we also need to put in there some critique, some thought, and some reflection on our medium as well. Because I think the other thing with working in crisis situations is that we also have to be very mindful the fact that this is not a normal situation. People are, if it's a very politically fraught situation, then we have to be very mindful of who we are talking to and what the ethics of visual representation uh, are. Because um, uh, what I mean, visual depiction, photos, they carry a lot of weight. So I really felt that this was something that challenged me a lot. Had to do a lot of thinking. What are the implications, especially here? You also have a lot of connections of power and gender and all these dynamics, right? And because we have to also take into account the fact that when we are writing and about people, and people who may not have a lot, or who may not have the same uh, 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 um, who may not be as privileged as we are, or the power dynamic is slightly different. Then this whole question of the ethics of portraying people, of especially portraying faces, of where all of that that is something that I had to really struggle with. And in some cases, I found that maybe a sketch or a story is a little more sensitive than just having a photograph in a situation where a person may not be that comfortable being photographed. But at the same time, how we depict this, because I remember a really long time ago, I was at a workshop, and I was a part of a team that was conducting a workshop on domestic violence. And a lot of the activists had to say that you have and were very wary of the workshop, and were very wary of visual representation, because they said that you cannot caricaturize the victims. You cannot show violence in a way that is demeaning to the people suffering. You cannot make it into this very, and especially with comics, we have access to all these like action sequences, all of that. And so all of that. So there is also, so along with comics being such a great medium and having all this potential, there's also, I think, there is also we have to also think about the implications of the work we do, and how we draw and how we represent this. And I think that's another thing that should be in our crisis plan when we are reflecting on this. Yes. So yes. So here, I just put I put together an extract from some of the works I've done here, and this is the piece. So, for instance, you can so this is the piece that was worked on really fast, and it sort of uses this the classic comics block, which I don't always use, but this was one case where I thought the classic comics block worked very well for me, and to convey this very staccato comic graphic narrative. Um, and I'm also showing it because this was really observation. A lot of these sketches were done on the road with bad mobile phone photographs indirectly, and then just quickly compiled together to sort of in the form of a graphic narrative, telling a certain story about a certain time. Right. Um, yes, and yes, and the other aspect that I also want to speak about is research, right? I think we, as a people who do, while we work, as people who often work on fiction, or we do, memoirs, and a lot of comics are also, I think it works very well with the memoir form. So, we are working, we are often used to working with um, personal stories, or so on. But I think when we are and when we work with fiction, then we have a certain amount of leeway, right? We can make up a lot of things. We can invent a lot of uh, uh, we can invent codes. We can invent people. There is a lot of freedom to work in a certain way. But when it comes to working on graphic narratives that comment on a crisis, that comment on an evolving political situation, I find that secondary research, like getting, reading up, getting a lot, getting all your other material in place, is equally important. And some of the best graphic reportage comics do that really well. And here the challenge is that, how do we balance this? How do we put in the secondary information, the extra information, and the visual element, and your field notes? And that is, I think, such a that is a very rich experience, to be able to sort of, once you put all of this together and it comes together in the form of a comic, it really it's very effective. It works at so many levels. And of course, here I would like to say that, for instance, this COVID comic, I never landed up publishing this one. Yes. So and so I think here, but it's here. I would also like to say that I think um, the other point with working in a certain ecosystem like ours, a certain media ecosystem like ours, is sometimes art. Sometimes we also have to just do art for ourselves, to record it for the moment. Because I don't know if this is a question that's going to arise, but there are only so many, the avenues for publishing comics very limited. And I should also put that in um, at this point. And this is what makes it, this is what also gives it a lot of potential for alternative means of disseminating material, right? And so I think, uh, and this is something that we have to balance out, because if there is a story that is really important for you, I think we should go ahead, and you have a day job, I think you should go ahead and do it, and keep it as a record for another time when the situation will be better, when when the that there'd be people willing to publish it or have the space to publish it, or even for it to be a reference for you at a later point, to be able to come back and perhaps reimagine, reinvent it into a new work. So that's the other thing. I do sometimes within a crisis, within a certain situation, I'm not always looking for a publisher, because sometimes it's also a question of, and that is when we go back to the idea of the crisis. Sometimes um, comics, art, putting a story together is also a way for us to understand our environment, our crisis. Is also sometimes it can also be a very personal way for you to try and interrogate, comprehend, and survive, right? So yes, so that, and I think that too is a form of hope, that you do work that may not even be published immediately, but in the hope for time in the future when it will serve as a record for you, and that it will find a space eventually. Because I think this is something that we should also, especially because now I've been working in the medium for so long, so I feel like these are also things that one should be speaking about and bringing up, that you may not, the publishing scenario may not always be ideal, but somehow we create anyway. Right. Yeah. So yes. So now um, so I'm just going to take a deep breath and now step back from nonfiction and the graphic reportage and the crisis package of working in the now, in the immediate, and then and move back to what I call the tea kettle, the metaphor of the cup of tea, having the time and a little bit of mind space to be able to put the kettle on the stove, wait there for a cup of tea, and the kind of stories about difficult times or troubled times that one can do with that, right? So yes, I found this. I put this little piece of this image. It's almost, I think I did this maybe 15 years ago. This never made it to any of the books. This is just one of those early pages that I just came up to inspire myself to work more. And I thought it would be interesting to put it here. This page does not, it's not a part of Hotel at the End of the World, but it was, this is one of the pages that inspired the book in that sense. And so yes, the the other kind of once we have a little bit of time, once a crisis is passed, then there is also the time, it is also time to not forget, to think back. And then sometimes fiction is very useful, the memoir is very useful. We may also use it as a time to think back, make stories, and because that point of crisis, because so much of literature actually pivots around that moment of crisis, that leads to, it can be a personal, it can be a political, it can be personal, it can be a whole country, it can be a global thing, but like that moment of crisis, which functions like a pivot in moving the narrative around for a good story to work. Yeah. So yes, so Hotel at the End of the World too, which is a book I wrote a long time ago, but since we're talking about comics, I just wanted to just mention here that so all the stories here sort of it's a collection of interlinked stories, and so all the collections here also all move around these particular moments of crisis for these individuals and how they react and the stories they tell and the things that for that and the things that happen around that moment, right? um, so just for me to extend the metaphor into fiction as well. um, and so I just thought we could briefly look at a couple of pages from the book. And yeah, yes. And so how are we, Krishna, how are we doing for time?
We can maybe go on for another 5 minutes and then.
Another 5 minutes. Oh, that's perfect. Hmm. Right. So since we have 5 minutes, I thought to conclude, to sort of bring all our to bring all the different threads of narrative that we've moved through this evening. I thought it would be nice to just end with a story, and which will this is a story about this is fiction, all right? This is fiction. It's a sort of like a retelling of a myth, and but again, it brings back our narrative to that point of crisis and the possibilities that crisis can offer. So I'm just going to quickly read through this as a way to conclude my talk. Okay. I dream of her again, a large woman from before time holding up the earth. She's from a myth, an old story. I cannot recall where I read it, but she is here in my dream. And now something is going to happen. This woman will cross a line, commit some transgression, as these women of myth always do. What is it? What will I do? I don't know. Wait, ah, wait, yeah, sorry. Yeah. What is this? Sorry. Yeah. Wait, sorry. Just like, yes. Okay, I'm right. Yes. I dream. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. So I dream of her again, a large woman from before time holding up the earth. She's from a myth, an old story. I cannot recall where I read it, but she is here in my dream. And now something is going to happen. This woman will cross a line, commit some transgression, as these women of myth always do. Right? And so this is and all of our stories often function around, pivot around this moment of crisis, right? And the crisis in this story, I'm sort of ruining it in a way, is that this woman, she sees all these she sees she's holding the world on her shoulders, and she sees people laughing, and she sees a plate of chili, and she wants to stop moving, she wants to stop rotating, because she feels this unbearable desire to have a chili, right? And the crisis is that, she has this duty and she has this responsibility, and she's going through life, and suddenly she wants to have a chili. And then what happens? And then, because she wants to have this chili, she moves. So the earth moves. And, all of these, and, she has to sort of then, and because she moves, it causes an earthquake. And the earth shook, and fish rose in the sky, and a whole lot of changes happen. And, and when things finally settle back, we see that it was a new world, right? So it doesn't work that well when I'm doing it here. And I hope you'll go online and find the story and read it, because it's free online. But so this is the note. But I wanted to end with a note of hope, that uh, out of a crisis, um, I hope that we all find the strength to keep working, whether we get published, whether we don't get published, and in that work, I hope we find hope and such and the possibility towards imagining and thinking of a new world. Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your work with us and all of those very helpful insights, especially the various approaches and sort of the lenses that you use to view your use for your work. Um, we are now open for questions. So what I can do is I can read out the questions so that it's easier for you that way, Parismita.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we will open up the session for discussion. You can just put the questions on the chat. There's one thing that I wanted to ask you. You briefly touched upon the ethics of representation, and all of your stories have so many incredible characters from various backgrounds, linguistic, cultural, religious, all of that. So, have you, like, what are the ethical paradigms that you sort of follow, and have you had any challenges while working
Mhm.
on these characters?
Right. Yes. Yes. So thank you for that question, Krishna. I would, in fact, I feel as if every story, especially at this point in my career, for the last couple of years at this point, I think back and I think maybe as a very young person, working with comics, maybe this was not something, maybe this was not something I was thinking of actively then, but, in the course, especially after working with, pieces come and the last like say decade or so, this is something for every piece I sort of think I try and I try and engage with these issues, right? And also, so having said that, Krishna, I'm not really not sure if I get it right each time, right? So that's the other thing that I think work, I think any kind of artistic engagement is also a process. And, and for me to sit here and think that I actually have a formula how to go through this is really not correct because, everything is changing. Uh, um, and, um, and I think with every new story, I have to review this. I have to sort of review what the paradigm is, what the risk is. Also that, right? What the risk is, because I sometimes feel that the way, for instance, like this whole like stories that I do, which will go to the in online, right? Which in the I mean, you have no control over the or if I put up something on Instagram, right? Or I put up something online, you have very little control of the kind of circulation, the life of circulation it'll have, right? And sometimes I feel that when we are working on people, whether when say I do an interview with someone, and the power dynamic is more towards me, right? Is power dynamic is such that I am the more privileged person working in English, having access to all this media and all of that. And sometimes I feel in a situation like this that do we even convey? Are we really conveying to the person who we are interviewing or whose face we're going to depict or whose story we're going to depict exactly what exactly like the realm of circulation to which the story is going to be? Is there enough awareness in that, in our engagement with that person? So these are really questions that I struggle with and I don't always get it right. Like, for instance, like with the story that right at the end, the myth, I cannot, for instance, recall, like sometimes I can't recall a myth, like I read a myth, I can't recall exactly what book it is or whatever. And but I think what we can do is we can try our best. And of course, the thing is, I think each time I do a piece and each time I'm doing this, I learn so much from it. So I just, so, um, so I think I think the answer really is to listen to people and to give people really, to try your best to give people an idea of like where your piece will land up, the kind of life it may have and the kind of risk it may inject. That's right.
Thank you for that answer. We have quite a lot of questions now on the chat. I will just go in order. So the first question is, tell us something about the readership of alternative narratives in comics, the latent challenges in India would that could be jogged down to alternative narrative.
Yeah. Mm.
That's yeah.
Yeah, so alternative narratives is really like I don't see myself as an alternative. I see my work as very mainstream, in that sense, right? Like Hindustan Times may not be carrying my work, but that does not. But where I am from, it's very much my concerns, is very much the concerns of people around it. The medium, yes, I think we still have a way to go to make um, and I think comics should be a popular medium, but there's all this question of distribution and who controls the media and all of that, right? So I think the idea, but anything that is marginal, anything that is alternative, there is so much potential in that. I feel, right? So if something, then you have so much more freedom to be able to do new things with it. And as far as the like, I think, say for instance, Krishna and all in Bengaluru, right? Like, I mean, I know that there's quite a comic scene there. Right. So I think locally also, I mean, I think your question will depend. So the answer will depend so much on where you're located, what you're able to access. And of course, now we have the internet, there's so many people who have a following and who are able to find readers and viewers or through the internet. So I think the idea of the alternative is a very powerful one, but at the same time, like, I don't see my work as alternative in any way. I see it very much as mainstream. These are my concerns, my medium. So yes.
Thank you. The next question is, can you give a list of magazines or venues where someone who's just starting out on comics can try publishing their works?
Right, right. Oh my God. Yeah, so thank you for the question. And here I have to really I have to also mention here that for the longest time I've been working in education. Right. So I've been working and I don't do comics there. So I have like this proper day job where I do a lot of like um, not creative, not very creative work. So I've done this for a while now, but at the same time, but I do try and keep track of like publications and so on. But I think what you should do, so my advice to you is don't go looking for people who are publishing graphic novels or comic books, because that would be very difficult. There are too few of them. Instead, I would say, yes, continue to look for them, but I would also now say that we need to change our strategies somewhat, and we should also try our best to actually get all the mainstream newspapers, and if not so much newspapers, I also feel the the online websites, right? I think you should push stories. I think you should go and approach them for stories anyway, right? Until they really give in and start publishing. So I feel that, like, I wish I could give you a list saying, these are the magazines and these are the websites that are open. But instead, I would say that get a project, get a project that you think will be of is newsworthy, will be of interest. Do a couple of, like, do a couple of pages, spend some time working on it, maybe get a concept note, and then harass these people. Just send it out to all these editors, send it out to all these websites, get your social media. I'm not very good at that, but I bet that social media is a wonderful space as well. So, but definitely keep working and convince even people. And I think the challenge is to convince editors who may not be that open to comics to accept it as to accept your work.
Thank you. I'll just combine the next two questions. So one
Mhm.
is, could you please share an example of how you personally negotiated and distilled an experience of crisis
Mm,
during your on-ground reportage in Assam to make a comic?
right.
And Dhaval asks, have you done any work in Assamese language?
Yeah, nice means. Yes. Yes. Unfortunately, I primarily work in English, which is like a sort of odd thing to do because but all my interviews, all my engagements will be in Assamese. I speak the language and I read it. So all of that. But unfortunately, I don't work in Assamese. But having said that, tomorrow if someone were to make me an offer, someone is if there's a magazine, um as I said, the last couple of years, I've also been doing other jobs, and we are all like I write for, I do a lot of writing for culture and so on. So we are all doing all these other jobs. So it's not even as if we are able to dedicate a lot of time to comics in that sense. But yes, if someone is to offer, if someone is to offer me a space to work in Assamese, or do a translation or something, I'll be more than happy. But no, unfortunately, I don't work primarily in Assamese. Yes. And the other question was, my own personal experience, how if I distill my own personal experience. This is a yeah, this is a good question. And so I mean, I think writers, comic book artists, I sometimes suspect that a lot that there is always there is always the biographical, right? There's always the experience that they will that they sort of uh, use, and that they will reflect on, and that they'll use to create work. Yeah, but at the same time, your question, but when it comes to graphic narratives, then this is all like, these are all interviews, so that I'm not making up like that. Then I mean, if I'm reporting on, say, a certain crisis, on, the anti-CA protests, or someone stuck in a particular NRC situation, or COVID. Yeah. So when I'm doing this kind of work, then it's very, then I can't make up, right? So if I'm writing up certain graphic narrative, I can't make up stuff. So it is all my experience. It will be like people I'm talking to, and yes, like that.
We are close to 8, but we do have a few more questions. So in case you're okay with it, we can take a few more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, sure.
So one question is, how was your experience with research on domestic violence, and what
Mm.
were the difficulties, especially in depicting it?
Right. No, so actually, I just gave that as an instance of one workshop where I happened to be one of the people helping with the workshop. And but it turned out, and it was just one workshop. I never did extensive work on domestic violence. But for me, it was a very, very important moment when these activists stood up and questioned, the logic, and the question what kind of ethical grounds we were going to have for our visual representation. I was very young then. I wasn't even the main facilitator. I was one of the people just helping out. But for me, that was very pivotal. That was a very important moment, because I recognized the fact that, oh yes, we may come in as visual creators, we may come in as comics with particular, coming from particular aesthetic traditions, coming from particular comic traditions, with particular styles. But when we are working on nonfiction, graphic narratives, when we are working on issues of gender, or any kind of sensitive issues, then we really have to take into account different set of ethical frameworks that is then needed, right? So I gave the example of domestic violence, but this is true of every kind of thing, depending on the kind of reporting you're doing. It's not just enough. So my point is, it's not just enough to be this graphic novelist and to have the style and to have this, to have all your tools. We also need to go that, I think, to be working in times of crisis, we also need to be able to take that extra step and to be sensitive to all of it. And here I'd also like to invoke, this whole idea of the feminist ethics of care, where basically care is more important than the story, right? That the person is secure, that you do not yeah, that I think should be more important than the story. So
Thank you. I think that was a very important question to take.
mm,
We have, and I'm combining two questions. So one is in response to your previous comment on publishing. So this says, could you comment on the publishing infrastructure for comics in India and the difference between self-publishing and digital publishing versus print
mm,
in terms of reaching the audience? And there's
mm.
also, slightly related to publishing again, is a question about censorship with regards to graphic novels. You had partly addressed that in the talk as well. So did you have to deal with it at any point in your career? And if so, how did you go about it?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, it's a really, I mean, that so the last question, the question of censorship, right? So censorship can happen in a variety of ways, right? So one is the whole idea of the censor, as in there is someone who is a censor who will be like, this works, this doesn't work. So that is one. But if you look at the larger idea of censorship, right? And when it comes to work, what I mean, it can exist in it permeates our world in so many different ways, right? Um, so it can be in terms of whether a piece is even accepted by a magazine, whether someone commissions something, pulls it back. But one experience that sort of stays apart from the others is I was I had just written I published Hotel, and I had this wonderful deal. So I've been commissioned to do this to do this graphic novel, a serialized graphic novel for a Tamil newspaper, for the children's section of a Tamil newspaper. And it was just so thrilling. I was thrilled to have got that gig because so I'd done like about maybe 60 pages or something. And, I would send in 10 pages and they would have 10 pages translated in Tamil and they would then come out Tamil. There wasn't even an English edition. It came out like in Tamil. So they would just translate it. And it was so amazing. And they had this little booklet of comics. And I think it lasted about maybe 4 issues or something. And one day I just got a policy. Sorry, it's too political. We don't need it for the next. And I always thought, I said, oh my God, what if there was a child reading and you'd gone to like and you read the first and the second and the third. And then like I wonder if the person just thought, oh, what happened? The comic stopped coming from the next time. Right. So yes, this happened. So you can't even use the word censorship for it because it's just that sometimes works are commissioned and they don't go through, and it's a very difficult thing. No matter what people say, it's a very difficult thing to absorb, but you have to have a thick skin. I think that's the other thing about working on crisis. You need to have thick skin and you need to keep creating uh, um, and just finish the work. I never finished the story after that, but I wish I had. So yes, so maybe that is the thing. You can't. It's a part of life. Works getting cancelled, works getting censored, whatever. You just have to keep working. Yeah.
There are a couple of questions that deal with working on the ground again. Again, you had briefly touched upon this. So one question is, when you're working with vulnerable groups of people in a very difficult situation, have you encountered resistance from them? When you go to document such a critical work, how do you approach people? And another question is, I wanted to ask if, as an artist, we want to go on ground to cover a crisis, what can our approach be to interact with the people? Again, very similar lines, without
Yeah.
being too journalistic and retaining the empathy of an artist. Do you go talk to
Yes.
people simply, or would you recommend being an observer and just existing on ground?
Oh, that's a very good question. So first of all, first of all, I would actually recommend I would actually recommend that a good idea is if you know a journalist. So journalists are very good. I mean, the sense that if you know, I mean, of course, there are a lot of journalists who work very sensationally and all of that, right? But most journalists will have that ethics of work there, right? As a journalist, you have to. There are all these rules you have to follow as a part of your practice. So, one good idea would be that if you can work with a journalist, right? So, then what happened is that so the journalist is there because the journalist knows how to do this, right? So, the journalist can be there asking the questions and, doing this, doing her work, and you can be there taking notes and deciding how and seeing one if you both want to collaborate and do a piece together, or two, having a secondary piece. So yes, working with a journalist, I mean, that's a chance. That's one of those things that I really wanted to do. I haven't done it, but I think I think there's a lot of potential to that, right? Because as an art, like even when I had to go to the field, I found it very difficult because I didn't have a lot of that training, so you're learning a lot on the job. And frankly, it's not as if I haven't done that much work, but this was work that was it was very impacted my process a lot, right? So I would suggest that yes, find a journalist. If there's a journalist who's willing to work with you, collaborate. Collaboration is great. Then you take you take what you have, and then this other person has their knowledge, and you get an amazing piece together. So that is one. The other is, the thing to do is to begin work. If you're going to be sitting and wondering how are you going to do it, the best thing to do, and it doesn't have to be, and when we talk about doing coverage, it doesn't have to be something very extraordinary. Walk down through your neighborhood, and walk down through your neighborhood market. You'll get a story there, right? Walk down to just a market day. What is happening, who's selling, who's buying, who's the guy they have to pay this, the amount to, right? Who's having problems with, who's being like moved away by the municipal board, right? Who's bullying who? What is happening? Just walk down to the market. I mean, that's ethnography for you. So we don't really need like, I mean, you just walk on a regular day anywhere. Like, what is happening with the garbage collection in your on your road, right? What is the state of the close by school or the health center or anything? So the thing to do is to just find something that is acceptable, that where you'll be comfortable with initially, and or just interview your own family. Interview your grandmother or someone like that, right? So I think the idea is that you develop gradually, right? And most importantly, you start somewhere, and I think the rest of it will fall into place. And read, right? Read good journalism. Read, like, see what the comic book see what other comic book artists are doing, how they're negotiating all of this. Um, and there's quite a bit online you can find even without buying these very expensive books. So look up like Joe Sacco and all of that. Of course, they're very big. It's a very, very different uh, way of working, but it's always good to see what other people are doing in terms of their work as well. Yeah.
Thank you. There's one question about satirical comics. It seems like they are no longer as prolific or widespread as they used to be. Will satirical comic artists have space now only online? And how do we fight to retain our right to free speech in our current political climate?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, right? That's a very good question, and I think there is no answer to that, or the answer is basically with all of us, right? I think the very fact that we are having this conversation and we are trying to think of strategies of how to keep working through crisis, right? And I think this itself is a moment that we sort of take as of how to of like of crisis situations. And is yes, the online space too, huh? You have to be yes, we should not take our online space for granted either. And at the same time, a lot of really, really big comic people all started off doing like pamphlets and signs and photocopies and things like that. So there is all of that, there are all these guerrilla methods that you can use to get your story through. And the other is, I feel that I'm not an editor, right? I'm not an editor, so I can't really answer this question of the larger media space. But I think there is something to persistence. You really have to, I think that if you really want to push a story, you'll have to be able to really persist and speak to as many people as you can, approach as many people as you can, send as many emails as you can, and hope that your story, that, someone's going to, and someone's going to pick up the story. So I think there is still space, but we have to look harder for it.
I think we have two, three more questions, and then we'll wind up for today as we're out of time. Uh, One question is about climate resilience. How do we feel we could build climate resilience through comics? How would you
Mhm.
ideally present the comic art form to convey the message and build resilience?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think because the climate is such an urgent thing. And I mean, I think um uh this is good because again we're talking about how you put together comics too. I think if you have an idea, right? One is that go online, look up people's work. For instance, the green humor, right? What is the yeah. For instance, there's so many people working with comics and cartoons and climate. right? So look up these people, see how they're working. Don't copy them, but get an idea of what is possible, what kind of stories can we tell. So and sometimes, what is of real interest is if you're able to just document the day-to-day challenges of climate change, climate and at the same time you get your science, get someone who knows the science to collaborate with you, get it together. So for this, I would say there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work of people using comics and cartoons to speak about the environment. So check that. Look at what is happening. It will give you ideas. It will give you ideas on how to do this. This is, and to get working and look up scientific material, look up what is there. Just start working. Actually, sometimes the best solution to a lot of these questions is just to start working and see where that takes
Yeah, I think Rohan Chakravarti is
you.
the
Yes,
one you were
Rohan
talking
Chakravarti
about.
is who. Yes, yes. I mean, I didn't want to say the wrong. Yeah, Rohan Chakravarti. Yeah, so he's a very good example of someone who's working with such humor and and sharpness about the climate and wildlife and so on. So look up people like that. They're doing excellent work.
Yeah, so there's two more questions. One is about the form and style itself. Should the portrayal of victimization always be beholden to realism or realistic portrayal, as opposed
Yeah,
to a
that's a good
vague
question. Mm.
caricature?
Caricature.
Okay, I
Yeah,
don't
that's a
know.
horrible word. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
that's a horrible word. No, the caricature.
Caricaturized.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, you just give me
Um,
a moment. I'm just going to have to get my. Yes. Sorry, I just have to get my. I thought, yes, it's gone a little bit over time. Yeah, sorry. Yes. So yes. So personally, I'm not somebody who's ever been very comfortable with the caricature. It's just a mode I don't work with. Not because it's good or bad. It's just something that I have never had an interest in. I'm more interested in sort of like the story and the graphic narrative and that kind of thing. And yeah. So yes. So and the caricature is really important. I mean, and caricature is a great form. It's a satire, like But what I would say is that what they say about there are different types of humor. But you know what they say that um there's the kind of humor where you make fun of people more powerful than you, right? So when you speak truth to power, when you are able to yeah, when you basically satirize or make fun of people who are more powerful. But the same when we reverse it, right? When we poke fun at those who are less privileged than us, those who are less, that becomes a very different thing. So this humor and and so the idea of the satire is so much depends on how you do it, right? But that is something that I sort of that's a framework that I kind of follow. That satire, making fun of those more powerful, because that's a very, very different dynamic when you do it for those who may not be able to ask you to shut up. Yes.
Thank you. I'll read out the last question. So sorry to keep you
No, no,
and
not
the.
at all. Not It's such a pleasure. Yeah.
Kasturi says she's very fascinated with both Hotel at the End of the World and your nonfiction reportage lately.
Mhm.
As someone, you are also delving into this both as an artist and a researcher. I
Yeah.
wanted to know, how does your engagement differ from that of a journalist in terms of experience, especially in nonfiction reportage?
Mhm.
Obviously, in outcome from the view for the viewer, the experience of reading a graphic reportage is very different from an article. But for the artist witnessing, what is something that stands out in the experience of documenting?
Yeah. 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 I was very clear right from the onset that I did not have the training of a journalist. That does not mean you can't pick it up. Of course, as the thing about I think the really great thing about the work we do is that we are constantly learning. And and there is, we have an obligation to be constantly learning. So I'm very So I'm very happy to learn. I'm happy to tag along with a journalist and learn. But at the same time, journalists have especially journalists today, they have very, very specific. They have great skill sets to be able to do this, to be able to get in. They can to be able to get all this data, to be able to do the RTIs, to be able to, to be able to do investigation in that sense, right? So that is so I'm very clear about that. I'm not a journalist. I don't have that, or rather, I don't have the training of a journalist. Sometimes you could say that some of this work could possibly fall into what could be, slow journalism or graphic reportage, right? So, and I think, and I think that is also like we've been talking so much about the publishing ecosystem and the fact that I've not had the answers I wish I had when you asked me where should I publish, where to go, what is the publishing scene like, and all of that. And I think, but the joy of that is that it has also pushed me to do a whole lot of very diverse work. So maybe if this is an amazing, big, amazing comic scene, then maybe I would have never done graphic reportage. Maybe I would have just done like, been working on novel after novel after novel of, or comic book after comic book, right? So, so I think our the very fact that our ecosystem is not very set, the very fact that our medium is slightly, it doesn't quite fit in anywhere. It also means it also allows us to experience with a whole lot of diversity. So I would actually say that, that I would actually answer this question very differently, saying be open, just be open to the opportunities you have, right? So you will always be this person, because I'm always this person. It's like, I'm not a journalist, I'm not an educationist, I'm not even a children's book writer. But if I get an opportunity, I will do it. I will go in there and use the strengths and my toolkit as a comic book writer, as a writer, to try and do the best I can and to learn in the process, right? So